Yeah.
All right, buddy. Let's have it.
Thank you all so much for having me. I know in the docket it says I'm a comedian, but I have nothing funny to say to you. We are told that America is the greatest country on earth, but tell me if this sounds great. More children are gunned down in our nation than any other country. More people declare bankruptcy in America due to medical debt than any other country. America says it's the greatest country on earth, but it's one of the only countries that doesn't guarantee women maternity leave. Many women have to go back to work just a few days after giving birth. States across the U.S., including Oklahoma, have contracts with prisons to make sure they have enough inmates. And if they don't, we have to pay the prisons to maintain their profit margins. Ambulances are so expensive that it can easily ruin someone's financial life. People would rather call an Uber than call an ambulance. Our entire society is put behind a paywall, whether it be needing insurance for health care or insurance can deny coverage for treatment that's already covered and that people already pay for. Also, the insurance companies can get profit. Or insulin, which costs $80 monthly anywhere else in the world, but in America it costs over $900. This is exploitation. Or our toll roads, paid for by our tax dollars who are owned by private corporations who turn around and charge us to drive on the roads that we paid for. All of this so that a robber baron can steal even more money from working class Americans. They say we are the freest country on earth, but according to the Cato Institute, we rank 14th in freedom. We have the highest incarceration rate of any country, which is pretty ironic for being the freest country on earth. We have freedom so long as we don't criticize the system that pays hardworking Americans a fraction of what they deserve. How sinister a country whose Declaration of Independence says all men are created equal, but then proceeds to abuse any minority that isn't straight white men. How morally corrupt a nation who preaches being the greatest country on earth, but in practice proves over and over again that it doesn't care about its people, but rather for the profit margins of the rich. We like to shake our finger at other nations and call them corrupt, but America has perfected the craft of corruption. Because in America, we can legally bribe our politicians. You want a law passed? Bribe a politician. You want a government contract? Bribe a politician. It just so happens that politicians you bribe are very helpful to corporations after they get elected. We call it lobbying, but the rest of the world calls it corruption. This is the type of hypocrisy that makes America so good at corruption. Something that's illegal and immoral to any decent person. You name it lobbying and all of a sudden it's not immoral. Now our fellow Americans won't know it's corrupt because you named it lobbying and made it legal. This is one of the core reasons for our country's downfall. We call ourselves a Christian nation, yet we bomb more countries than any other on earth. We supply more bombs used to murder children than any other country. We say we're a Christian nation, but we do not feed the poor. We put our children in school lunch debt. A shithole country is not one that is too poor to take care of its citizens, but one that has the money and chooses not to. Because our government prioritizes the profit margins of shareholders over the well-being of our people. This is why our healthcare system is so horrible. Americans pay more for healthcare than any other nation, yet our health outcomes are worse than many third world countries. Because the government prioritizes the profit margins of pharmaceutical corporations over the lives of our fellow citizens. We are told that we can't afford it. We are told who's going to pay for this, who's going to take care of the citizens. But our government never asked that question for corporations. When the banks and the hedge funds and the corpos who intentionally commit fraud and steal from the American taxpayer, it's Americans who have to foot the bill. When the automotive industry and airlines and insurance industries gamble and run their businesses into the ground, the government bails them out. But when Americans need a bailout like we did in 2008, they are told, so they don't lose their homes, they're told to have a rainy day fund. But they never tell corporations to have a rainy day fund. They don't have to save money because they know the government will bail them out with our taxes. All the while, corporations get every tax break under the sun while avoiding paying their fair share in taxes. This is not a free market. This is socialism for the rich and exploitative individualism for every working class American. The government says they care about veterans, but they leave them to live on the street like dogs. They cut funding to the VA almost every single year. They say they want to end crime in this country, but ignore the true cure to ending crime, which is ending poverty. Putting resources into education in poor communities is how we end crime, which we've known for over 2,000 years. But they don't want to do that because in order for the prison industrial complex to keep a steady supply of prison slaves, they need crime to continue. The greedy 1% are so evil that even our children can't escape its depravity. We put our own children in school lunch debt because their parents can't afford it. We will deny a child a substantial meal because they are born into a poor family. Poor not because they don't work hard, but because the profit margins of a corporation are more important than providing Americans with a decent wage, even though they're working hard. Our politicians say they care about children, yet the majority of our homeless kids that age out of the system are from foster care. They say they care about kids, but when the largest child trafficking ring in modern history was uncovered, the government refused to follow the law, released the files, unredacted, and continue to this day to protect pedophiles. This is the country we live in, one that would rather protect rich pedophiles than protect children. They say they care about women, yet giving birth in this nation is more dangerous than being a soldier. America has been at war for the majority of its history because of profit. Our country lied about why we went to Vietnam, and our people paid the price in blood. Our country lied about why we went to Iraq and Afghanistan. They said there were WMDs, but we know that that was a lie. And they knew it was a lie, but they did it anyway to provide oil companies with cheap oil, big pharma with cheap opium, and defense contractors with higher profits. And they were happy to let our fellow soldiers pay the price in their blood because they don't care about us. They care about the profit margins of the 1%. They tell us to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, yet the hardest working people in our society are the poorest. Growing up in Oklahoma, I learned how to tell if someone was a farmer. I can tell by the calluses on their hands. Farmers are the hardest working people I know, yet they are losing their farms at a rate not seen in over 100 years because they don't get to own their tractors anymore. They are rented to them at extortion rates. They don't own their seeds anymore. They are rented to them, and their harvests are bought at pennies on the dollar so corpos can sell them back to Americans at prices that can only be described as price gouging. But we are told the rich deserve another billion because they worked harder. No human can convince me that any CEO works harder than a farmer. Tell me why the average American pays a higher tax percentage than a billionaire, more than a corporation. How does a corporation deserve more than our fellow farmers? Especially while their employees are living on food stamps because the company won't pay them enough to have a thriving wage. We are told myths about the welfare queen is the problem in this country, yet the biggest welfare queens in this country are corporations and billionaires. We are told just to work harder and we too can live the American dream, yet our grandparents were able to earn an ounce of gold every week on minimum wage. If our generation wanted to accomplish the same thing, it would be 750 hours a week of work to have the same thing they did, but still less. Now we have two-income households, most with more than one job, all to still live in poverty. There is not a single state in America where you can work an honest 40 hours a week and afford a one-bedroom apartment. FDR said the minimum wage is not meant to be a minimum subsistence wage. It's the minimum wage to thrive in this country, and that any business that requires paying their employees a poverty wage to function does not deserve to exist in this country. Whether or not we realize that the majority of Americans agree on what's important, but our government and the corporate-ran media want you to believe the most important issues of our generation are what bathroom someone uses, or what adults do in the privacy of their own homes, or someone's legal status. But this, like every other culture war topic, is a distraction from the real problem. The problem is that the greediest people on earth are robbing you blind but convince you that it's not a problem. From the Roman Empire to the modern era, the story of how empires fall share this one similarity. When you allow the rich to hoard more wealth than they could spend in 10,000 years, that society will collapse. Our country and the people of the world will one day realize that the problem isn't your fellow human beings or any other issue the news tells you is a problem. The problem has always been and always will be that the wealth of a nation belongs to the people who earned that wealth with the sweat of their brow and not to the oligarchs. They fear that the people will one day realize that we have more in common with every worker in America, regardless of religion, skin color, or place of birth, than you do with a billionaire. Because as we've so clearly seen, the rich will happily sacrifice your family's lives if it means an extra dollar for their bottom line. Today, they pit you against your fellow Americans to normalize the state-sanctioned police force who is allowed to break down your door, ask for your papers, and kill your fellow Americans with zero consequences. This is what the Nazis did. They always have and always will pit you against your neighbors and your fellow working people to distract you from the fact that the billionaires are stealing from you. They are robbing you blind, taking your rights, taking your health care, taking away support for veterans, workers' protections, rising the price of medicine, food, and health care. And they get away with it, all because they've convinced you to hate your neighbor. The biggest con the government ever pulled on us was to convince us to work 40+ hours a week, 5 days a week for 50 years, spending no time with your friends, your family, your passions, or your children, all to retire with a Social Security check that isn't even enough to pay 1 month's rent. The truth is we are all slaves to the system, yet they distract us with entertainment and games and overwhelm us with the fear cycle so that we just put our heads in the sand and continue to work, continue rushing around in life, never having a moment to look up and realize that we are all slaves in this system. A system that convinces you to work the majority of your life away, never spending time with your family, your children, and if you're lucky, retire at 65. And if you're even luckier, you get one more decade before you succumb to a lifetime of working. All so that a few powerful white men at the top get wealthy beyond belief so that they can live like gods amongst men. And then they accomplish this by convincing half the population that the oppressed minority is the reason your life is hard and not the wealthy minority, which is actually the reason for your struggles and pain. Your enemy is not your neighbor. Your enemy is not an immigrant. Your enemy is not someone with a different religion. Your enemy has always been and will always be the rich and powerful who pit us against each other so that we never rise up to overthrow the con men in business suits. Until women have true equality and true power over their own bodies, until native treaties are honored, until the mass thugs kidnapping and killing our people on the streets are brought to justice, until the Epstein files are released fully unredacted, so long as our tax dollars are spent on bombing children in the third world, so long as the modern day slavery in the form of the prison industrial complex is still standing, and so long as the military industrial complex takes priority over the well-being of our fellow Americans, I say we call for revolution. Thank you all so much for having me.